Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Thank you very much for watching my video today, and appreciate you taking your time out of the busy day to watch my video. Oh, this video is a little bit late, but I'm going to get her done today. The top baits that I'll use in March. Uh, March is a busy time for the bass. The bass will be moving from their winter haunts and moving up into shallower areas, getting ready to be in the pre-spawn and moving toward their spawning pockets, their spawning flats. So there's a lot going on with the bass. The bass will be traveling uh, traveling like bluffs and uh, down flats and that kind of thing. It's kind of their normal road, uh, moving toward the spawning area. They'll come up on out of the deep up onto a point, and then they'll follow that point out there in deeper water. Especially if there's a bluff or river bend, uh, or just where it drops off there at the point, they'll use that as their road going to the shallower water. Uh, my my number one bait that I'll be throwing is a jig, just an old football jig. Uh, the water temperatures uh, have warmed up maybe 5 degrees from their lowest point, and that'll get the fish on the move. Uh, I'll fish the deeper part of points. I'll fish bluff ends, and I'll fish part of the bluff, about the first 100 feet, 200 feet of a bluff. I'll fish it. Uh, that first couple 100 feet is always the best part of a bluff, of a bluff end, because the fish they don't have to move much. They can go up and down that bluff to get back in deeper water, or they can come up in shallower water to feed or whatever they need to do, or they can get out on the bluff end, especially if it's a point. Excuse me. Especially if it's a point, they can move out on that point, that flat of that point, and feed. Uh, but to start off with, I'll be throwing a jig, uh, 10 to 25, 30 foot deep, and working it slow. Water temperature may be 48 to 55 degrees, so the water's still pretty chilly. So I don't want a trailer on my jig that moves a lot. I want like a twin tail grub or a beaver style bait, or what's another good one? Uh, you can use a cross style bait as long as its appendages doesn't flap a lot, doesn't have a lot of movement. Another good one's a chunk, like a Zoom Super Chunk or an Uncle Josh Pork Frog. Just an old chunk bait. Berkley makes a really good chunk, and of course it has the Berkley Maxin in it. Those are good trailers until the water warms up 55, 58 degrees, and then I'll start putting a little more action on my trailers once water temperature gets 55, 58. Then once it hits 60, then it's on. I mean, I use whatever trailer I want to use when it hits 60 degrees. It's on then. Excuse me. I'll be fishing a jig on a 7 foot to 7'3" medium heavy action rod. Uh, 17, 20 pound test fluorocarbon. The reel, whatever reel you prefer, it's not that big a deal. And then my next bait that I will be throwing. Good night, excuse me. Next bait that I will be throwing in March will be a crankbait. A rock crawler is a wonderful crankbait to use this time of year. The Rapala DT series just depends how deep you're fishing. If you find fish in 8 foot of water, DT 8s, DT 10s. If they're in 4 to 6 foot of water, DT 6s, and so on. DTs are a good crankbait. Wigglewort's a good crankbait. Berkley Fritside's a good crankbait. Some of the Ott Defoe crankbaits are really good crankbaits to throw. You have several options. It just depends on how deep the fish are and how deep your bait runs. You always want your bait to run a foot or two deeper than what the fish are at, so you can keep contact with the bottom longer. And 99% of the time when you're throwing a crankbait, you want that bill digging the bottom, reflecting off of rocks, stumps, and all that. And so just make sure your crankbait runs just a little deeper than the depth that you're actually fishing. Another bait that I will be throwing is a square bill. Square bill crankbait. This time of year, water's warming up, fish is moving up shallow. Throw that square bill along rocks, riprap. The rocks and riprap is a really good thing to be fishing around. Good cover to be fishing around right now because the sun hitting the rocks and the riprap will warm that water. Sometimes 4 or 5 degrees warmer than what the water is surrounding that area. So you always want to check out that area. Check out an area that's got a lot of big rocks. They don't have to be big, but some of the bigger ones a lot of times will absorb more of the sun's heat and help warm the water up. Of course, riprap banks along like dams and bridges and seawalls and that kind of thing are excellent for holding the heat. Another good bait to throw is a lipless crankbait, but I'm not a real big lipless crankbait guy, but they'll fish will flat bottom. They'll be good for this time of year too. But the square bill and like a rock crawler, I'll be throwing those on a 7'3", 7'6", something like that. Medium to medium light crankbait rod. anywhere from 8 to 12 pound test line, fluorocarbon line, and then your reel. I like at least a 6-to-1 gear ratio to help get that crankbait down to the bottom quicker and start bouncing off the rocks and stuff, getting my strikes that I want. There's 3 baits: the jig, the crankbait, and then the square bill, which is a crankbait, but it's just a different category. When the water starts getting warmer, then I'm gonna put chatterbaits and swim jigs in the same category. The chatterbait and the swim jig, uh, throw that around grass, throw it around laydowns, throw it around standing timber, throw it around uh, stumps, rocks. Both of those are great baits. You can throw them in the same situations. It's just sometimes the fish, if they're finicky, if they're highly pressured, if they've seen 3,000 chatterbaits already coming through or bladed jigs come through the area, that's when I tie on the swim jig. Not as many people throw the swim jig as they do a chatterbait, so the fish is not going to see it as much, and then plus it's not as noisy, and sometimes if the fish are highly pressured or finicky, that quieter presentation uh, will get more bites. I'll throw the bladed jig or a swim jig. I'll throw them all the way out in 10 foot of water. It just depends on the cover and the structure that you're around, and if they're goodness, if the fish is around standing timber, you can fish it down just above where they're suspended in the standing timber. Another one of my favorite baits this time of year is going to be a spinnerbait. I'll have a spinnerbait tied on from now on throughout the spring, summer, and fall. The spinnerbait will be on the front deck of my boat. While the water's colder in the upper 40s, low 50s, uh, you want one that you can work slower. You don't want them going real fast. You want a slower one. A lot of times I'll use a Colorado blade or an Indiana blade instead of willow leaf because those blades creates more drag, and you can make them run slower than you can willow leaf most of the time. I will use willow leaf, especially in clear water, because you don't need all that thump. But a lot of times, most time when I'm throwing a spinnerbait, it's going to be in dirtier water. It's going to be a little bit off color. It's going to be river green at least, or a little bit stained, and I'll be or runoff. You know, if after a big rain, if you can find where water's running in a creek, back of a creek, or back of a pocket or whatever, I'll be throwing a spinnerbait in that runoff. Uh, uh, that current will have them feeding, and I'll be throwing that spinnerbait around that. You throw a spinnerbait just like you do a bladed jig or swim jig. You'll throw it around brush piles. You'll throw it around laydowns. You'll throw it around standing timber. You'll throw it around rock. Throw it around stumps. Flooded brush. This time of year, you get a lot of rain. Flooded brush up on the bank. You know, you'll be getting bushes on the bank. Same thing with bladed jigs and swim jigs. Those are excellent baits to be throwing in flooded brush up in shallow water after water has risen after a lot of rain. If you're throwing a spinnerbait on a 7 foot to 7'3" medium heavy action rod, anywhere from 14 to 20 pound test fluorocarbon, and just whatever reel that you're comfortable with. I don't think it matters as much as some people believes it matters, unless you want to burn a spinnerbait after the water gets warmed up, where you want to burn one. Then the faster gear ratio reel will come into more of a play then. When the water warms up with that spinnerbait, say 55 to 60, you can start moving a little faster. I start throwing more willow leaf at 55 degrees. I start throwing more willow leaf spinner baits than I do Colorado, unless the water is muddy. The water's really stained up, and I need the extra thump to get the fish to know where my bait's at. Then yes, I will throw a Colorado blade then. Let the fish tell you if they want a trailer on that spinner bait. Uh, just use a paddle tail trailer, swim bait on the back of it. You can use a fluke on the back. You don't want a lot of action. Just whatever your favorite trailer is. You can watch some of my other videos that shows other trailers to get more of an idea of what trailer to use. And last but not least, this time of year, that water is going to hit 55 sometime in March, more than likely. Uh, Especially with the warmer days that we've had. At 55 degrees, I will definitely be throwing a buzz bait. Throw a bigger bladed buzz bait so you can reel it extremely slow and just fast enough to keep it on the top of popping. Actually, at 50 degrees, I'll start throwing a buzz bait and throw a True Faith custom bait, buzz bait with the big blade. I can reel it extremely slow and start getting bites on a buzz bait. But those are my top baits that I'll be throwing in March. Of course, I'll have other baits. I'll use other baits if I need to. Uh, if I need to go finessey, then of course I'll be throwing a tube or a Ned rig or a drop shot. But 99% of the time, if I need something finessey, then I'll be throwing a tube because not as many people throws tube. Those fish sees those Ned rigs and shaky heads and drop shots all the time. But I don't think they see a tube nearly as often. But anyway, there's my top baits for March. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. Please subscribe and share and hit the like button so that I know that you've liked this video. And until next time, I will talk to you later. Have a blessed week, and I will see you on the water.